Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're going to get started here. So glad to see such a good turnout this evening. My name is Eileen Chang, and I'm the head of product operations at Weave. If you don't know about, shout out to Weave. If you don't know about Weave, our mission is to provide a better healthcare experience for practices and their patients. If you want to learn more, you should check us out online. I'm going to keep this short, though. Just cover a few housekeeping things. But first off, welcome. And also, I do want to give a round of applause to Product Hive and to Dan Olsen for being here. Thank you for coordinating this. Just quick applause. We're excited, super excited. So some housekeeping. There's pizza in the back. There's beverages in the fridge. Restrooms are out here by the elevator if you need them. And with that, let's get started. Let's get the show started. So I'll turn it over to Dan.
Hello, Hivers. Let's give first a round of applause for Weave. They not only provide the venue, but also the food. So, yeah. I think this next presentation will be relevant to a lot of you just because in the Salt Lake area, seems to be a lot more B2B business models than B2C. A lot of presentations have to do with B2C. So I think this will be relevant to a lot of us, which is why I'm really excited about it. I'm also really excited to have Dan here. A few weeks ago, Dan actually reached out to us, and I was really excited because just the immense popularity of the Lean Product Playbook, which is a great book. Usually you have to book Dan way in advance and, pay a fee, but out of the goodness of his heart, he happened to be in the area and volunteered to do this presentation for us for Product Hive. So let's give a round of applause and kick it off to Dan.
Thanks a lot, Nick. I appreciate it. I'm going to try to go without a mic. Can you guys hear me back okay? Yeah, I'm pretty. No? Okay. All right, we'll do it this end. It's fine. I basically was coming in town to teach a private training workshop. And I always love engaging with the product community wherever I can. As I started looking up the meetups. I'm like, wow, Product Hive has been going at it since you guys have come back strong. Trust me, I was telling Jennifer and Aileen, thanks all, by the way. I want to give Nick and Aileen let's give them a round of applause for making this happen. Let's just say I was very agile in my planning for this. I was like 3 weeks ago, I'm like, hey, I'm going to be in town. You guys want to do something? And so anyway, but I'm going to some other cities like Dallas. No product meetup going on there for me to talk at. And I'm going to LA, and surprisingly, LA, they just haven't come back. So kudos to Product Hive for creating such a great community. And I went on LinkedIn and I had all these people I was connected to in tech, and I'm like, this is great. So you guys it feels like you have a really good, vibrant tech community, product community here. So I'm excited to share some advice with you. And as Nick said, most of the talks and advice that's out there, it's B2C. And I kept hearing from enterprise people, yeah, Dan, but what about B2B? What about enterprise? So I made this talk just for the B2B people and the enterprise people. And so I'm just curious real quick, who works in enterprise or B2B here? Okay, is there anybody who works in B2C? It's okay. There's gonna be relevant stuff for you too. You just don't have to deal with the sales team. That's the biggest difference, right? So we'll talk about that. Cool. All right, so let's jump in. Was there anything else? Who's a product manager? I usually do this at my meetup. Cool. Who's a designer? Who's a developer? Thanks for coming, man. It's great. All right, okay. Who's an entrepreneur? Awesome, okay. And then the other thing I like to do is who's at a small company, 10 people or less? The entrepreneurs. Who's at up to 100 people? Who's up to 1,000 people? Who's it bigger than 1,000? All right, great. We got a nice distribution. Awesome, cool. All right, great. Well, I'm going to jump in. I couldn't resist the tie-in with Star Trek with Enterprise Product Management. Who's a Star Trek fan? And who's a Star Wars fan? Yeah, May the 4th is coming up, so let's get ready for that, right? All right, cool. Well, real quick, if you don't know about my background, I did write the Lean Product Playbook, which came out 6 years ago. And I started out with a technical background. My parents got me a computer when I was a kid. I'm glad that they did because I was comfortable coding. I was an electrical engineering major. And my first job out of college was actually designing nuclear submarines, which was a really fun job. And then after doing that, I knew I wanted to kind of get more into software technology, and I was fortunate and get more on the business side of things. So I was fortunate to get into Stanford Business School. That's what took me out to Silicon Valley a long time ago, and that's where I've been ever since. And when I was in business school trying to figure out what to do after graduation, I learned about this new emerging career called product management. And the more I learned about it, the more exciting it sounded. But I had never done it. I only worked in the Navy on submarine design. So I asked everybody, where's the best place to learn product management? And this was back in like 1997, 1998. And at the time, everyone basically said Intuit, which was in Silicon Valley. And I was fortunate to get a job at Intuit. So I worked on that. Today is April 16th. Did anybody use TurboTax in the last month or two? Yeah, right. So so I worked on Quicken, which was the original product. And then after working into it for a while, I went to startups as a head of product and tried to apply what I had learned at startups. And then I got into speaking, I got into consulting and being an interim VP of product for startups. So I worked at big companies and at startups. I also run my own community in Silicon Valley, which does talks in person and on Zoom. So, and it's just a 1 hour time difference. So y'all are welcome to join that. I'll share the link later on. And that's the URL for my website. All right, let's jump in. Oh, and last but not least, I worked with a bunch of companies. B2C, B2B, large, small, various verticals and industries. And since it is so rare to have so many product managers together, we're usually too busy to be able to afford these luxury of like hanging out for an hour, eating pizza, or hanging out talking product, right? I want to start out with one of the most valuable pieces of product management knowledge that's out there. And some of you may know it, but I'm guessing most of you don't know. That's the product manager's motto. It's a bit like Spider-Man's motto. Do we have any Marvel fans? Anybody know Spider-Man's motto? Say it. That's right. We got some true fans here. With great power comes great responsibility. The product manager's motto, it's similar. It's just a little different. And it's with great responsibility comes no power. We got to get the product shipped. We got to hit the OKRs. We got to finish the roadmap. We got all kinds of stuff to do, but no one reports us. We have to beg the developers, please do this for us. Designers, you have to give them cookies and stuff like that. We have to influence without authority. That's what we call it, right? So anyway, I want to talk about today 5 of what I consider to be top enterprise product management challenges. And they are clients dictating specific solutions to you, having to satisfy buyers and users, sales influencing product priorities, inflexible product release deadlines, and struggling to apply an MVP mindset, which I was just here talking with the week product team about that last one. So who thinks these sound like you got at least 2 of these going on at your enterprise company? All right, cool, I think. All right. And this may be a little therapeutic for anytime you get product managers together, a little therapy happens, It's like, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. Let's jump in right away with the first one, clients dictating specific solutions. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, how often are you out there, or your sales team is out there talking to a big important company, big important client, and we need you to build feature X for us, right? Especially if you're a startup and you're trying to make money, you're like, dollar signs are lighting up. Oh my gosh, they need us to build feature X, and we're going to make all this money if we do that, right? Well, when they ask you to build feature X, they're actually asking you for a solution. And the main framework from my book and my talks and the way I think about product is the product market fit pyramid. And real quick, the foundation of it is your target customer, who are we trying to create value for? The next layer up is, what are their underserved needs? And that's the market, basically a group of people that share a set of common needs. And then in the product layer, we have what's our value proposition, which is how are we going to meet their needs in a way that's better than the competition? And then we get the feature set. So when somebody says build feature X, you just skipped all 3 layers and you jump right there. It's like ready, fire, aim. Like it's just, there's no, and it'd be one thing if they actually knew what they were talking about, but the number of times I've seen the company actually build feature X and then the company not use it because they weren't even clear on their needs, right? So if I talk a lot about problem space, solution space. These 3 layers are problem space. If you just jump into solution space, if you start there, that is like so risky. You have no idea who's the customer, what are their needs, things like that, right? I like to tie it back to, we all hear like 80% of new products fail, 90% of new products fail. Part of why they failed, there's 2 big reasons why they failed. One of the biggest is they jumped in right here at feature set. They jumped in with a solution without getting clear on those other things. Okay, and so I want to clarify problem space versus solution space a little bit. Problem space is a customer problem, need, or benefit that the product should address. Sometimes people get wrapped around the axle of like, is it a need? Is it a want? Is it a pain point? Is it a job to be done? Is it a user story? It's all the same kind of thing, right? It's just, basically, speaking of user stories, who knows the user story template as a blank? I want a blank so I can blank. Everybody knows, right? Everybody knows this. That last part, so I can, that is the essence of the problem space. Why would a user care about this? How is this going to create value for a user, right? And so if you follow that template as a blank, you're going to be clear on who the customer is, and you're going to be clear on what the benefit is. It's going to increase your odds of success. Let's say I just felt like, it's just too hard to share photos with your friends. I want to make it easier to share photos with your friends. That statement, make it easier to share photos with your friends, that's a problem space statement. I'm describing how I want to create value for you. I managed to avoid saying how I'm going to do it. You might be thinking I'm building an app. I didn't say I'm building an app or mobile app or web app or anything, right? So the point is, they're like two sides of the same coin, but they're different points of view. The solution space, in contrast, is a specific implementation or design to address the need. If the very next thing I'd said was, oh yeah, and last week I launched an app that makes it easy to share photos with friends, that app would be in the solution space, right? Or if I didn't do any coding yet, but I had a designer friend, Mary, and she created a set of mockups for that app, that set of mockups would also be in the solution space, right? So that's the difference. And, the bottom line is too many product teams and too many companies go rushing in the solution space, sometimes because a big company says, build me feature X, and they jump right there. Sometimes because they just don't do enough discovery. And the point is not that you can never think about solutions, but let's aim before we fire. Let's make sure we're clear on what that is. And so this is a learned behavior. This is not you were born with this awareness, right? And I know why most people, the default way of thinking, the solution space, that's everybody's default way of thinking. We live in solution space. That's where we live, right? So this problem space is like a learned mindset. And what you want to do is just kind of, next time you're in a team meeting and someone says, we need to build feature X, hopefully this little antenna goes off and goes, hey, wait a minute, they just said something in solution space. How do we know what the problem is that we're talking about here, right? And so I call that solution pollution. And as you build up your awareness of problem space, you're going to see it all over. You're going to see people in your company doing it, the sales team asking for features and solutions, right? Key stakeholders asking for features and solutions, not talking about customer problems at all, right? And so that's what I call solution pollution. And it's okay, it's going to happen. We don't expect everyone to learn problem-based thinking, but if somebody is advocating, hey, I think we should build feature X, then you can just kind of try to get them to think about the problem space and saying, okay, why would that be valuable? I hear you saying you think we should build feature X. Why would that be valuable to a customer? Or how would that help a customer, right? That's how you bridge the conversation to the problem space. Hopefully, if you see that. So if we go back to this scenario, we need you to build feature X for us. You're not trying to negate their idea. One thing I like to do is say, hey, well, definitely, I hear that you want us to build that. To make sure we build it right, to make sure we build it correctly, can you help us understand what problem that will solve for you, right? That's a way to bridge the comment. If a client or a customer is asking for something, this is a way to kind of diplomatically try to get to the problem space behind it, right? And again, I've just seen too many times companies just salute and say, yep, we'll build the feature that you want, and then they don't end up using it. The customer, the client doesn't end up using it because they weren't even clear. They started in the solution space. So it's solution space all the way down, like turtles all the way down. Who actually is talking about a customer problem here, right? So I won't go any further into this. I have plenty of other talks on how to define the problem space, so I would recommend you check those out. All right, the next challenge is having to satisfy both buyers and users. This is a key difference between B2C and B2B. Like if you're a B2C app, you've got consumers, like say you're Instagram, right? Okay, it's just all these influencers and people using Instagram, it's B2C. The buyer is the user, the person that's making the purchase decision is the person that's using it. And back to the pyramid, the foundation of the pyramid is target customers. So if you've got more than one target customer you need to create value for, you need a pyramid for each one, right? And so we might distinguish between the buyer or the business client and the end user. The buyer is the one that makes the purchase decision, right? And the end user are the people that use it every day, every week. And they're going to have different needs. They could have some common needs, but they're probably going to have some needs that are distinct to themselves. And that will make you have to focus on solving different problems, right? To illustrate this, let's just talk about an example that most people are familiar with, Salesforce, right? Who's the buyer for Salesforce usually? VP of sales, CRO, or the head of sales, basically, right? And then the people that use it are all the people on the sales team. So that's the difference between the buyer and the user. So the buyer has to make a decision. They have different needs, right? The person that buys it is probably not in there doing the detailed things that the salespeople are doing every day. There's actually a third kind of persona or target customer they need to make happy, which is the admin. It's kind of like a super user who sets up the other users. They have permissions and functionality and needs and problems that they need to address that the average user doesn't have to address, right? So there's like 3 distinct pyramids, at least for Salesforce. And in some B2B ecosystems, you could have like 4, 5. It gets really complicated. Some people work in healthcare. You might have the healthcare provider, the insurer, the patient, just to name 3, right? Going on. And basically, they may share some common needs, but they usually have different needs. And so you need to basically define the problem space for each type of customer, for the buyers and the users. What are things that buyers typically care about? They usually care about price or value, like what am I getting for my money? Compliance, are you complying with the regulations? Reputation of the seller, well, how many other Fortune 500 companies are using you guys? Productivity, right? Like, okay, hey, I want this. The whole reason we're using your tools to save my employees time so they can be more efficient. Or growing revenue, right? Hey, you're going to help our sales teams be more effective, and we're going to increase revenue, right? Those are typical things. And these tend to be, more financial related. On the end user, tends to be more about productivity. Are you streamlining my workflow? Are you providing me with functional benefits to solve the things that I need to do? Filling gaps in functionality, ease of use, right? And just to summarize it, these tend to be more financial related benefits. They care about the business case for it. And the users mainly care about like the functional benefits that you're going to be providing for them. And I often get the question, well, Dan, how do we prioritize across 2? There's no one magic silver bullet answer. You've got to analyze the needs of each of them, the problems of each of them, and figure out, how far to go down each stack. And obviously, if you can't convince the buyer, then your product's not going to get purchased. But we've seen plenty of examples where somebody convinces the buyer. Maybe they play golf with that person and they say, yeah, I'll do you a solid. We'll sign a 1-year contract for your SaaS thing. But the product isn't that good. The team doesn't use it. When it comes up for renewal in a year, they're not going to renew it, right? So you gotta satisfy both of these. All right, the next challenge is the sales team influencing product priorities. Who has sales influencing their product priorities? Anybody? All right, yeah. So that's the thing. So let me take a step back. I was actually talking about the trio or the triad, typically the functions, the minimum functions you need to have to create successful products. You have product management, UX, and development. I was talking to a company today that has a quad. You might have 4 or 5. It's extensible. It's not meant to exclude anybody. If you have QA, great. Like when I was working into it, we had QA would be in there and documentation was in there. Or maybe, product marketing's in there, or DevOps, or somebody else, right? It's okay. It's extensible, but that's kind of the core team you need for basically the products, right? And so in B2C, who else does that team need to coordinate within the company? They need to coordinate with marketing and more broadly, kind of the business folks. But these folks don't usually stick their finger in the pie too much and dictate priorities and say, you need to build X, you need to build Y. As long as you're, recommending a reasonable roadmap, you're delivering reasonable results, they kind of you have a little more autonomy in that, right? And obviously there'll be influences from them, and they can impact the roadmap as well, but not as much as in enterprise. So if we go to enterprise, we have all the same players as B2C, but we have one additional very special player, sales, right? And they're usually not as quiet and passive as business and marketing and B2C, just kind of just letting product kind of do their thing as long as everything's going well. They definitely have opinions about what should be built, right? And so I like to just always, when I think of a salesperson, I think of the stereotypical, Alec Baldwin character, always be closing. And when they're out there talking to prospects, right? If your sales team is talking to a prospect and the prospect says, well, I'm thinking about your product, whether to buy it or not. Is it going to have feature Y? What does the salesperson say? Yes, of course. Yes, sign the contract. Oh, yeah. That's coming next quarter. Coming in a month. It's coming. Yeah, let's go. Sign the contract. Let's go, right? And then the next salesperson is calling on a different client and they're asking for a different feature. What do they say? Yes, 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 yes to everything. They have no incentive to say no. They have no incentive to say no, right? They've got a quota to hit, somebody else's problem downstream. My job is to bring in the revenue. Someone else has got to lay the bricks for that, right? Now, what I like to say, what I like to point out is, and I understand why, saying yes to a feature that is supposedly going to make a contract come through and get you revenue, sounds good, sounds reasonable, right? But I would argue if you're saying yes to every request, that you are not being strategic, right? You are basically letting, it reminds me of the random walk on Wall Street. You're letting the randomness of the requests from the customers dictate your roadmap and what you're building, right? Now, especially for startups, if you're pre-profitability, I understand the pressure. Your whole point is, okay, we're a Series A, we've got 18 months of runway before we need to raise our next round. We've got to demonstrate certain milestones and earn certain revenue. So there's an incentive to say yes to any customer request if it really is going to make some big deal come. I call that chasing revenue. And a little bit of that is okay, but if you do a lot of it, you end up, I meant to put the slide in, I don't. So I live in Silicon Valley. Does anybody know what the Winchester Mystery House is? So you guys know Winchester rifles. So the widow of the gentleman has this house in Santa Clara, and on the outside it looks normal. When you go inside, she remodeled and added on, and every room is different. One's brick, one's wood, one's bamboo. There's a stairway that goes to the ceiling that goes nowhere. It's totally random. That's what I picture. When you say yes, if that's how your roadmap and product strategy is going, you're saying yes, then you're kind of building a Winchester Mystery House. And I've actually, I've been consulting for a long time. I've had clients get in that bind at Series B or something, and they hire me and they're like, Dan, we're not really a product company. We're kind of like a custom software shop. We built these one-off things. Our technical debt is horrible. For each new thing, we can't roll new stuff out because it's going to break other stuff. We've got custom JavaScript. We've got, and they get themselves in. Anybody have that kind of a situation? Or you probably don't want to raise. If you can raise your hand if you want, or if you're in that situation. It's painful to be in that situation, and you realize you're not a product company. A product company means you've got a product that you sell to multiple people. Yeah, you might have different flavors of it or different tiers where some people use some features and some people use others, but it's not completely different code running for, what percentage of code is unique to each client? That's kind of the litmus test that you could say, right? So anyway, I've seen that happen. And this is where I like to bring up a Steve Jobs quote about focus, where Steve said, people think focus means saying yes to the thing you've got to focus on. But that's not what it means at all. It means saying no to the 100 other good ideas that there are. Innovation is saying no to 1,000 things. And I like to paraphrase it by saying strategy means saying no. That is my favorite definition of strategy. If you are saying yes, and when I say you, I mean the head of product or the company is saying yes to every request, then you are not applying any intelligence or filter or discrimination at all. Think about it, right? You're just okay. You're randomly building stuff. And look, it's easy to say no to dumb ideas or bad ideas. What I love about this quote is Steve says no to the 100 other good ideas. The reality is we have more good ideas than we have time and resources to execute on. So hopefully, and look, I think we're going to get into this in a minute, probably. See, if saying no, I know as a PM, you may not feel empowered to say no. I'm going to cover this in a sec. So I'll cover that in a sec. The next challenge is inflexible product release deadlines. Anybody feel like they have deadlines they have to hit no matter what? Nothing can give? Okay, right. So this is where I like to bring up the concept of the triangle software development, or the iron, sometimes called the iron triangle because it's inflexible. There are these 4 fundamental properties when you're trying to build a software feature or product: scope, time, resources, and qualities. And they have to add up. They have to be in balance. It's kind of like physics. It's impossible to try to to have it not add up. And so, scope is the scope of the functionality that we're planning to build. Time is how much, kind of calendar time we're allowing for it. Resources, typically dev resources. How many dev resources do we have? Quality. Quality doesn't mean just the quality of bugs, not having bugs or not. It means the quality of all the product work you're doing, the discovery work you're doing, the design work you're doing, all that, right? And the reality is you can't over-specify it, right? If I say, all right, I'm going to give you 3 devs and, can't have any P1 bugs, and you need to build these 5 features by May 1st. How do we know if that adds up or not? That's just like, it's like, how do we know, right? And so one of these has got to give. When you're trying to specify, there's a thing called a slack variable. One of these has to give to solve for the other 3. Right now in the short run, let's say we did bite off 5 features with our devs, and we're going down the path, and big surprise, we're behind schedule, and we have to decide now, what are we going to do? What do we want to do? We thought we were going to launch these 5 features by May 1st, but now we realize that's a fantasy now. We know it's not going to do that. What can we do, right? Well, you might be tempted to say, well, let's get some more resources to catch up. Sounds great, right? Well, it's not like there are idle resources sitting around your company going, oh yeah, I'm not doing anything. I'll come help you out, right? There's plenty of other teams. And the other thing is, even if you could snap your fingers and magically get some new devs on, they're not going to be productive right away. They need time to ramp up, to figure out what's going on, to get familiar with the code base, right? And if you just double the developers, you're not going to double the throughput, right? There's like diminishing returns as you add people on a project because of communication and collaboration overhead. There's a whole book called The Mythical Man Month about that. Quality, no one usually cuts quality explicitly. Sometimes it just kind of gets cut quietly in the corner. We'll ship with this one bug, we'll fix it later. And then scope, you could extend the deadline. You could say, gosh, we still want to get those 5 features in. So the reality is, in the short run, resources and quality are not levers that you can play with. The only real levers you have in the short run are scope and time. You can either say, we're going to still plan to build those 5 features and move the deadline from May 1st to June 1st, adding time. Or you can say, we're still going to stick with the May 1st deadline, but we're going to cut 1 or 2 of those features so that we can hit it. And that's it. That's all that happens, right? And unfortunately, there's always uncertainty in product development, right? It's always uncertainty. It's like we get the long tail of basically of surprises that can happen. There's a good Don Rumsfeld video. He was talking about something completely unrelated, but he was like, there are known knowns, there are known unknowns, and there are unknown unknowns. And it's the unknown unknowns that come and bite you with this kind of predicting that happens, right? And, the other thing that happens is sometimes people will make a roadmap. It's like, yeah, I think we can get that done in the quarter. Yeah, let's get there. Yeah. It's like, well, did you actually scope it out? Like, how do we know? And then, typically we start the quarter and we're over 100% allocated by the time you take into account tech debt and maintenance and other stuff. And then during the quarter, people try to jam in the shiny object. Like, did anybody get an AI thing added to their roadmap in the last 12 months or 6 months, right? All of a sudden AI. It's like sometimes people act like, oh, let's just try to, go higher than 100%. You cannot go higher than 100%. Yeah, the team can flex and work overtime a little bit, but then you're going to burn people out. Like something's going to slip, right? Something's going to slip because of that triangle. And even if you don't acknowledge it, say you've got 10 things on your roadmap, you jam in 3 sexy AI things at the top. Guess what? The 3 things at the bottom are just going to not make that quarter anymore. They just slipped, right? But nobody said anything about it. All right, here's another question for everybody. What is special about these dates? March 31st, June 30th, and September 30th. What's magical about these dates? These are the magical dates of B2B software. More software ships on these 3 dates around the world than any other dates. Right? Why? It's just the end of the quarter. That's when we sign the customer commits. That's when the roadmap ends, right? That is what's called the fixed date mindset. And remember, I just got done telling you about the iron triangle. If you take the iron triangle and the intrinsic, kind of uncertainty and scope estimation, and you insist on having the fixed date mindset, something's got to give. Something's got to give. You're either going to slip features or you're going to cut quality, right? That's what's going to happen, basically. So, I know it's tough, but we want to have honest discussions about trade-offs here if we can. Okay. And then last but not least, kind of tying a bit of this together is the 5th problem, struggling to apply an MVP mindset. Now, I just had a fun discussion with the product team about MVP. What is it? Let's poll the audience here. What does MVP mean to you when you're MVP? How would you describe? If you had a brand new product person on your team, they had to explain, like, well, MVP, I never heard of that. What is that, Dan? How would you, let's get some audience thoughts on this.
Minimum viable product plus what your CEO wants.
Okay, so minimum viable product, which is what it stands for plus what your CEO wants. Yes, okay. Others, just other definitions? Yeah.
The smallest piece of software we can deliver to get the most learnings or gains.
Okay, smallest piece of software we can deliver to get the most learnings or gains back. Great, okay, good, yeah. Ideally a prototype. So he had the word software in his definition, and you don't. You have prototype in your definition, okay? What else? Yes?
I'm probably going to be wrong with your definition, but to me, it's an idea.
It's an idea, okay.
I present a
Great.
problem with an idea. That's
Problem? No, so that the part of the reason I'm asking is to highlight that there is no one right definition, that out of all the concepts and terms in the product world, this is the one that is the most divisive and there's the most disagreement on. So it's funny, in the last 3 answers that I got, smallest piece of software, gotta code it, prototype, gotta design it, no, idea. So we're getting kind of different points on a spectrum, yeah. So this guy wants to sell it. Okay, all right. So here, guess what? I'm a mind reader. I have a spectrum for all of you. We're going to see where you are on the spectrum, okay? So here's what we're going to do. Is an MVP something a customer can read to learn about your product? And raise your hand if you think a landing page can be an MVP. I expect my idea gentleman to be there. Great, excellent, cool. Got a few huckleberries. Okay, coming up next, can see what the product looks like. Mock-ups. Who thinks mock-ups can be an MVP? Got a couple more people jumping on the bandwagon. Something they can interact with, an interactive prototype. My prototype man's in. Other got some more. Okay, good. Look, hands are going up. Excellent. Does it have to be, say, some people like still got their arms crossed saying, no, Dan, it's got to be something they can use, like an alpha or private beta. And I still got some holdouts, I think. So I got one more for y'all. Something they can buy. We're getting the money. Publicly available. Everybody, raise your hand. Has anybody not jumped in yet? This is not good enough for them? Okay, good. I explicitly added this last one. When I first did this slide, it did not have that one. This was just like your product. And then somebody's like, no, we got to sell it. Dan. Okay, I'll add one more thing on the spectrum for you, right? And so we saw that you said software, that's kind of minimum here. He said prototype, that's here. He said idea, that's down here. What gives? Like, why do we have such a wide spectrum of interpretations, right? So here's what happens. The people over here, my friend who wants to sell it, is like, Dan. These other guys know what they're talking about. Don't you know what the P stands for? Am I in MVP? It stands for product. This is not a product. These aren't products. You can't use a mock-up. You can't use a landing page. It's got to be a product that somebody can use. The people over here go, like where I live, where I come from, hey, why you got to be so judgmental, man? Anything you can learn from is an MVP. You're testing your assumptions. It's an MVP. It's all good, man. Why you got to be so tight? So you see the two things, right? This is focused on the P. It's got to be a product. These people focus on the learning. It's like, hey, it's about the learning. Your definition was software with learning, right? So it just depends. There's two fundamental different interpretations. It's either they take the P very seriously, it's a product, or it's about learning. And in the team meeting I had, they tried to bridge the divide, and I knew it wasn't going to go anywhere. It's two fundamentally different points of view, right? And so that's why, I forgot to mention, it's bad when people are inventing other terms like minimal sellable product, minimal lovable product, minimal valuable product, minimal marketable feature. And some companies, they're like, we stopped using MVP because it was too divisive. I'm like, what good does that do? You don't even have a term to use anymore. So what I like to do is go up one level and call them all kind of MVP tests or experiments. And then my learning friends go, yeah, that's fine, MVP experiment, cool. And then I go to the hardcore people, if we call these experiments, but we reserve the real MVP, which we know is only those for MVP, is that okay? And that's how we kind of can try to do that. And there's really, if you tease it apart, there's like 3 different things going on here. There's definitely the MVP that is your live working product. What do we intend to ship to the world? What is the scope of functionality we intend to ship out there? That is an MVP. There's an MVP prototype, which is, before we build it, what's the representation of what it's going to be so we can learn and get feedback before we build it. But behind both of those is actually the real essence of an MVP is what needs to be in scope and what can be out of scope. It goes right back to the Steve Jobs quote. What can we say no to? What do we have to say yes to, right? That's really what it's all about. And this is just like ideas. This is thinking or documents. And whether you go and build it, once you agree on this, you build it and ship it, or which I would prefer, you prototype it and test it before you build it and ship it. That's kind of 3 different things going on, right? So it's really a mindset. It's a mindset. It's what's the minimum set of functionality to create enough customer value? What's the minimum required scope for our next release? And I like to just say, what can we say no to, right? What can we say no to? And this is where I want to acknowledge, it's easy for me to be up here and say, yeah, just tell those salespeople no. Tell those stakeholders no. I know as PMs you may or may not be empowered to do that. We're not really saying no. What we're saying is not now. Not for this release milestone, right? Not for this planning milestone, not for this sprint. That's what we're really saying. And when you get into these debates, people act like it's now or never. If I don't get this feature in, it's never going to get in. And that's not really what we're saying. So the way I like to get alignment and agreement on the scope of what we plan to build is with a roadmap view, right? So I like to have the swim lanes be either customer benefits or business metrics that we want to improve. And then we have time going left to right. And then we start putting our features in, by release milestones, like this, right? This would be kind of how we would say like our top 10 features we plan to build over 4 releases. So we're not saying, no, we got to wait and launch all 10 in version 1. That would not be MVP, right? That would be waterfall. And I won't get into it too much, but in other talks, I talk about how to use the Kano model to define your value prop between must-haves, performance, and delighters. But the point is, for this product, these were the must-haves. These 2 swim lanes, performance benefit 3 and delight benefit 2, those were our special sauce. Those were our unique differentiators for our product. So this MVP proposal, it's a candidate because we haven't confirmed if it's viable or not with customers, is basically saying we're going to have the must-haves and we're going to have our top feature for each of our 2 value prop benefits. That's the plan right there, right? And then we're going to get feedback on this, and then we'll plan to roll these 2 out, and these and these. That's how we're going to do it over time. Now here's what happens. So this, I'm going to basically now cover the two top mistakes that teams make with an MVP. The brave product team may have done a good job in discovery research and feel really good about this plan. And then some key stakeholder sees this roadmap and looks at it and goes, wait a minute. You're telling me you're not going to have feature P1A in the MVP? Are you serious? I think big clients X, Y, and Z are going to throw a hissy fit. I think we're going to be the laughing stock of the industry. I can't sell this without P1A in there. What are you doing? What are you talking about? It's ridiculous. Now what do we do? Right? What's most likely to happen? Is it going to get? Yeah, it's going to get moved in, right? It's going to get, right? It's going to get moved in. But what just happened? Remember the iron triangle? We just added some scope. Did we cut quality? No. Did we add resources? No. So what did we just do? We added time. But nobody talks about it. It's just a political arm wrestle. Can I get that feature in? Can I get the feature? Yeah, I'm going to make you get that feature in. Yeah, I got it in. Nobody talks about it, right? So step 1, when you're in that dilemma, is at least ask what's the delay? What's the trade-off, right? At the end of the day, our job is mainly to highlight trade-offs. Say, hey, we recommend going with this program. If you really want to get P1A in, here's what it's going to take. Here's the trade-off. We're going to launch a month later. We can do any combination of these 10 you want. It's just going to be later or sooner or later when we launch it, right? And if it stopped there, it'd be okay. But then what happens? A day or 2 later, some other key stakeholder goes, wait a minute. You don't, P3B? Are you serious? Oh my gosh, I'm counting on P3B for my sales pipeline. I just had golf with big client X and they need P3B. No way. You can't launch without that, right? So the next thing you know, you're pulling all these things in. And it's not an MVP anymore. It's just a P. It's just a big waterfall P now, right? And everything's delayed, right? And I understand where it comes from. I mean, it comes from, there's usually not a lot of data. There's usually just my gut and like, hey, I know the industry. I know our clients. It's like a lot of opinions, a lot of hot air and noise. It's funny. One time I was giving this talk at a company and they were re-platforming. And I told the story, and they're like, yeah, someone on the sales team said, we need this feature for IBM because IBM uses this feature. It's critical for them. And the engineer went in, looked at the data logs, and realized IBM had never used that feature ever, right? So a lot of times it's just stuff that's just made up, just concern. And it comes from a good place. It comes from this thing like, I'm a little worried this isn't enough. I'm a little worried this this isn't good enough. Let's just add a smidge more. The more we add, the better the odds of launching something that's going to be good. You know what that reminds me of? That reminds me of throwing spaghetti against, hey, the more spaghetti we throw, something might stick. This is not a very scientific way to do product development, right? We have a reason why we're recommending these 4 and why these other ones can wait. Right? There's a reason why, because we've done research and why it makes sense to do that, right? So, and look, none of these ideas are dumb ideas. Is P1A a bad idea? No, it's a great idea. In fact, it's the very next idea we plan to build. But people lose sight of that. It just becomes this existential crisis of, is P1A going to be in MVP or not? And what we're saying is, hey, we're going to just, so really, it's like, hey, do you want to have it in there and launch now? Or do you want to have it in there and delay launch by 2 months? Or do you want to just launch and then in 2 months we fast follow with that feature, right? And look, these are good ideas, right? That's why they're on our roadmap. And anytime, the problem is if you discuss any of these features in a vacuum by itself, it's going to sound amazing, right? Why wouldn't we do that idea? Why wouldn't we do that? We're not saying we're not going to do it. Anytime you're talking about a specific feature, it's like the spotlight gets on that feature. That feature's like a cute puppy. Look at P1A. Oh, look at feature P1A. How can you say no to feature P1A, right? But guess what? Feature P3B is also a puppy. They're all puppies. We have the whole roadmap is filled with puppies. They're all cute. If you pick any one puppy out, it's going to be hard to say no to that one puppy. You have to prioritize, as painful as it is, you have to prioritize the puppies. And I gave a talk at a company that had a real issue with this, and they made a t-shirt that said prioritize the puppies, right? So that's basically it. So here's my tips. If you find yourself, has anybody ever found themselves in a situation where a stakeholder was trying to add a feature to the roadmap, right? So step 1 is bring up the triangle and identify the trade-off. Hey, we can launch date X without that feature, or X plus Y months with the feature. That's the trade-off. Are you willing to take that? And they usually will say yes, because they're playing with monopoly money anyway. They don't care. Like, sure, yeah, I'm fine with that, But maybe someone else in the company isn't. Maybe CEO isn't or something like that, right? So you can use that as one. The next thing is, let's say they say, yeah, I'm cool delaying 2 months, but you don't think it's the right thing to do. How could we try to get out of this political logjam with the sales stakeholder to try to see if we could get buy-in to launch without it? What do you guys think we could do? Yeah.
I've been in this position. They understand numbers.
Yeah.
You say, okay, if we delay it 2 months,
Yeah.
we're projecting this much revenue.
Uh-huh.
We're going to lose this much revenue. And by the way, we've got to take 3 steps back to integrate it in there. So we're going to lose that much money too. So once you start throwing that money at them, they don't always pay.
Yeah. Well, if you can make a case like that, that sounds pretty good. But I'm a VP of sales. I just know we need that. We're going to be a laughing stock. So thanks for the data, but we're going to do that. Yeah. There you go. We prototype it. Now, do we put P1A in the prototype or not? No, that's the key thing, right? If you put P1A, so the point is, the gentleman had a great answer. You prototype this. Here's what I do. Because that senior stakeholder is so convinced that we need P1A, right? You do a little judo move on them. I'll tell you what, sounds like you have a hypothesis that the MVP will not create enough customer value without P1A in it. Is that your hypothesis? Do you concur? And then we look at you kind of funny, like, we found a hypothesis. I just want that feature there. Well, that sounds like your hypothesis. Our hypothesis is that it will create enough customer value without it. How might we test our hypotheses? I'll tell you what, why don't we go and show a prototype without it? And you, Mr. Stakeholder, you're so convinced we look like idiots without it. I bet you think if we test with 10 customers, all 10 will be like, where's feature P1A? I'll tell you what, if 7 or more, or 6 or more that we show the prototype to, say, where's feature P1A and complain about it missing, I'll be the first one to say, mea culpa, you were right, and we were wrong, and we'll build it. But can you agree that if less than 6 customers complain about it missing, that we can go on without it? That's how you kind of use their hubris against them, and you set up the rules of the game. And the reason you don't put that in there, because if you put that in there, say, hey, do you want that? Or if he's in there, it's like, hey, it's a free cookie. Yeah, I'll take that. Sure. So you want to see if people complain about it not being in there. And you don't even ask. You don't ask them. Like you just show it, because if it's so horrible without it, they're gonna say, where's it at? Right. So that's so first step is get the trade-off angle triangle. Second thing is prototype without it. Set up the rules of the test with the stakeholder, right? And then the third thing is, when I do my workshops, makes more sense, is okay, darn it, no matter what, we have to do this. Last ditch effort. Is there any MVP hack we can think of to solve the need without taking the hit on all the functionality, right? So when I'm doing a case study, the question comes up, should we build maps functionality or not? And then half the room is like, we need maps. The other half's like, no, we don't need maps, right? And then I finally get to the point, it's like, hey, if you insist on maps, the whole team quits. So what are you gonna do now? And then I'm like, what else could you do? Well, I guess we could link to Google Maps. I'm like, yeah, why didn't you think of that? People just don't think of it. They get so dug in. Like, why are you building a map? Just link to Google Maps. Is there something, that's what I mean by an MVP hack. And it's not always an MVP hack, but there's often an MVP hack. So the last thing you do before you bite the bullet is, let's just stop, take a time out, see if we can brainstorm any MVP hacks. Okay, cool. And then wrapping up here, the second big mistake, so the first big mistake with MVPs was they overscope it because of the spaghetti against the wall dynamics that we talked about. And hopefully the tips I just gave you will help with that. The second one, I like to illustrate with this pyramid. This is from Aaron Walters. He was the head of UX design for MailChimp, which had an awesome design way a long time ago. He wrote a book called Designing for Emotion. The second edition is out. I highly recommend it. But he also has a pyramid for how to think about a product and divides it into 4 different attributes. How functional is a product, how reliable is a product, how usable is a product, how delightful is a product. And the whole reason he created this was to elevate the discussion from usability to delight, right? You hear a lot more about delight nowadays, but his book came out 12 years ago. He was kind of looking over the mountain and saying, yeah, we all get usability. What's next? Delight is what's next. But back to this idea of an MVP, the idea is you start out with an empty triangle, and we want to be deliberate about, well, how much do we realize? How much do we color? And you're not going to color the whole pyramid in. That would be like a waterfall, right? But the second biggest mistake I see teams make with MVP is they use MVP as an excuse to do this. Now, what is this showing? This is saying, hey, we're not going to build all the functionality we're planning. We're just going to build a subset. That part is fine. That's exactly what we want. But they're using MVP as an excuse to kind of ignore reliability, ignore usability, and ignore delight. I mean, usually the way this goes is, yeah, I know we didn't have as much time to do user research and prototype and stuff, but we had to hit that date. It's just an MVP. Yeah, I know it's got some bugs, but we just got to ship on that date. It's just an MVP. That's usually how it usually goes. Now, when you test it with this MVP with customers, how do you think it does? It does horribly, because it doesn't matter if you have functionality. If it doesn't work reliably or they can't figure out how to use it, you don't get credit for it, right? So it's true that you want to build a slice, but you want the slice to be more like this. And it's not going to be perfect, but for the subset of functionality you do bite off, you want it to be reliable enough and usable enough and hopefully have a little delight. You can test your MVP, right? That's basically the idea, right? And so some people call this a thin slice. That's what they mean by this. Now, I want to show how this happens, how this plays out. Let's say we have a really important feature on our roadmap for the quarter, and we've done our discovery research, and we've got our prototypes. We're feeling really good about it. We're really excited about this feature. This is how we envision this new product that we're building. We start the quarter off strong. Everything's going well. We hit the middle of the quarter. We hit some road bumps, some uncertainties, things come out. We start getting up to that June 30th day. It's like, just ship it, get it out the door, right? Anybody have this happen? This is what happens when you insist on a fixed date mindset. If you insist that we have to ship on June 30th, no matter what, this is what happens, right? This is the quality getting cut, represented by visual, quality of visual design here. Okay, so again, to solve the top 5 enterprise challenges, start with problems before solutions. Again, in B2B, you might have multiple pyramids, buyers, users, maybe other people you need to listen to and prioritize across the different pyramid of users that you have. Be strategic, say no or not now. Be realistic about the scope and time trade-offs. Hopefully, if somebody's trying to jam more features in, you can use those tips that I shared with you. And hopefully, they will listen to you when you try to prioritize the puppies. So I mentioned that I run a meetup too. I've been running it we just had our 10th anniversary with Marty Kagan to launch his book Transformed that just came out. And during COVID, we were virtual and we built an audience all over the States. So we're hybrid now, just like you guys, which is awesome. So if you're in Silicon Valley, come on by, or you can go online and join us too. The next event is actually me giving a new talk on Gen AI for better product discovery that you can sign up for. It's this Thursday. All right, with that, I want to thank everybody. If you have feedback, if you could hold that up, your phone up, or go to that URL, I'll give you that way I can get you a copy of my slides. You can share any feedback you have. Here's where you can find me online. Yeah, and with that, I'm happy to open up questions. So thanks a lot. We're going to use the mics for questions, right? All right, cool. Great. Okay. Thanks.
I think most of the time people are really scared also of the MVP because you developed version 1 and that's where it gets stuck. Because now the comparison is not the product, there's some version of the product out there, but there is this next new shiny thing which brings in more ARR maybe, and which is, so the debate is now versus there is this kind of like marginal difference between version 1 MVP and 1.5, which probably has, let's say, ARR of 10 million worth, but then there is this big shiny idea which is 50 million worth. And that, I think, like probably 99% of the scenarios which I see is, I think that's where the mindset of trying to get in as much of the MVP, MVP happens because of that. MVP never gets revisited.
Yeah, the funny thing is, that's like shiny objects. So squirrel, it's like, oh hey, yeah, go squirrel, get AI, do AI, oh Bitcoin, blockchain, oh what? Like that's shiny objects syndrome. And so what happens, now the funny thing is you tied it to ARR numbers. Those were well researched, accurate numbers, right? Right, sales team? Oh yeah, we really believe those estimates that you give on those features. Right? So the problem is it's not even, it would be great if we had a nice financial case. It's usually not even that. It's just, oh, shiny object, right? And so if you get into a situation, I get this all the time, where teams are like, yeah, Dan, this all sounds great, but we never get to go back and work on version 1.1. And I have a slide, I don't have it here. It's like Lucy holding the football with Charlie Brown. No, I'm definitely going to let you kick it this time. Yeah, sure, no, definitely. Yeah, I'm definitely going to let you do 1.1 this time. And so if the teams learn over time that, hey, we never get to work on 1.1, then they're going to be a pressure to jam more in. I get it, right? But the right thing to do, the problem is, this is all conjecture. Right? This is a conjecture. We think these 4 features are going to be great and be enough. We think those are the next 6 set of features to build. The second you get this in market, you got to be ready to throw the rest of this stuff out the window, because all of a sudden now, like, people are really using your product and kicking the tires. There may be some like P3E that we don't even have on our roadmap. That happens all the time, right? When you launch your product, people start asking you for some feature that wasn't even on your roadmap, right? So what it really comes down to is like, what percentage of resources post version 1 will management let us spend on just getting some feedback and like iterating a little bit and polishing it a little bit, like, right? And so that's where you get into, if you're just talking at the feature level, then you're never going to win. It's like, yeah, well, we just launched feature A and now it's time to work on feature B, right? You're never going to win. But if you just say something like, hey, can we just agree that we're going to get like half a sprint, or 2 halves of a sprint, it's something you quantify. You got to get your foot in the door and say, hey, can we get like, X story points in the next month to just get feedback on how this went. That's how, you know what I mean? That's like one of the top techniques I know to get agreement. And then the question is, if you get the agreement, do they then follow through with it? But part of it is if it's not a specific ask, right? There's always going to be some new shiny new object coming through. Yeah. Yeah.
About 30% of the time was on the new big shiny stuff. 30% was enhancing what we already have, all that polish, improving it, customer feedback. Then 30% was on the technical foundation, stability, tech debt, all those sort of items. So we we'd actually look over time, like how are we spending their time? Yeah, 10% kind of flat.
Sure.
Sometimes the business needs to move a little bit more in one area than the other. We really try to adhere to that.
Mhm.
Okay, make sure that we're meeting all those key priorities.
That sounds good. Do we have any Seinfeld fans in the house? Remember when Kramer decided to make the reins double wide? He blackened out the white line on the road to make it double. Sounds like you're living in a nice luxury. 30% on tech stuff. Who gets 30% on tech stuff? So that's great. That's awesome, right? But most people don't. So that basically your VP of engineering and your VP of product have to have the savvy and the willpower to impose that tops down resource allocation, which is awesome, right? But most companies, they don't have a tops down resource allocation based on themes like that. It's just shiny object, shiny object, shiny object, shiny object. Oh, the VP of engineering saying the whole thing's going to keel over unless we do some tech debt. Okay, you can have 2 sprints to do some tech debt. Great. And then we're going back to the shiny object factory. Right? Unfortunately, that's how a lot of places are. So the way you proposed is a good way to propose. If that's great, if you can get there, if you can get the buy-in. A lot of times, are you in B2B? My friend, welcome to the club. Welcome to the reality. Take the rose-colored glasses off. You're in B2B now, my friend. There's a salesperson telling you 30%. What are you smoking? Yeah, no. Yeah, see, I had a feeling. Something didn't add up. Yeah, go ahead, yeah. I know. I'm not saying it's not possible. I'm just saying, you know. Sure. Sure, yeah. Well, there's a power balance between the head of product, head of sales, and head of engineering, right? And in that situation, it sounds like your head of engineering had some ability to kind of carve stuff out. In other places, it's like sometimes it's like a 3-legged stool. It can be totally out of balance. It can be sales running the shop. We don't even make a roadmap because it's pointless because sales sells all this stuff and then we take the orders, we're the short orders, we're the waiter, take the orders, we take it to the kitchen, which is the developers, right? There are places like, I'm not going to ask people to raise their hand. I guarantee at least 3 or 4 people in this room are at those kind of a company. And then there's the other one where it's like maybe engineering, where engineering runs a shot just because maybe because it's a really technical product and they were one of the co-founders and everybody respects them and wants to listen to them, and the head of sales isn't pushing them. I don't know, but usually there's a tension between those 3, product and sales, where product's trying to create customer value based on discovery research. Engineering is trying to keep things maintained and performant and modular, and sales is trying to generate revenue. And none of those are bad or intrinsically bad or good. It's just what's the balance that you have between those 3. So anyway, back to your thing. I would just say you need to quantify a follow-up amount of resources, either a sprint, and it won't be the next sprint because you're not going to have time to get feedback. That's the problem. There's a delay because if you launch the feature now, it's going to take you, 2 or 3 weeks to get feedback and yada yada. And then it's like, yeah, can I get a sprint 5 sprints from now? And then it's kind of like, so maybe a better way to do it is, can we agree on X story points within the next 2 months or something? You know what I mean? And you just have to keep track of it. But intrinsically, people should understand that spending 0 investment post-launch is silly. That's just like silly. You definitely didn't crush it. Nailed the feature. We launched it. Ship, yeah, crushed, move on. You didn't crush it. Nobody crushes it when you launch it. Right? Not even the big companies. All right. Yeah.
So how do you? So you have a conversation with the P1A.
Yes.
They're saying, okay, I can give it version 1 for 1.5. So they've kind of.
They've anchored on it. Okay.
We get feedback.
Yes.
Yes. Instead of doing 1.5, we do 1.3, which.
Yeah. I'd rather be in your world than you have to do P1A and MVP worlds. That's slightly better. We're not in the B2C, ain't Disneyland yet, but we're over here. Okay. So So basically this is great. Let me restate it. We got their buy-in that they can wait. They can cool their heels and we're going to launch P1A in 2 months. We got them to agree. But then we got this in market and we realized, oops, that P1A is actually not the most important feature now that we've got it in market and people are actually kicking the tires and using it, right? So that's where you again, Yeah, I mean, if they're reasonable enough to defer P1A, I hope they're reasonable enough to deal with the new data, right? So, and again, if we can tie it back to revenue numbers, that's great. It's always hard to tie it back to revenue numbers that are real. You can make up numbers, sure, but
They made them up.
yeah, sure, I know. It's so funny. I taught a workshop at one company, and they have they had engineering, product management, UX, and kind of analytics / finance was another key member on a team. And I remember we were making business cases, and the person said, yeah, when I first came in, I'd be really careful and do my Excel spreadsheets and do these things. But then I realized everyone else is just kind of making these large numbers. So I just started making up large numbers too. Like, okay. All right. Next question? Yes. You got a mic there.
All right. Do you have any tips for working on the front end and back end of products? And what I mean by that is we could create an amazing product for this target customer, but that target customer doesn't move the needle for our business on the front end. Or on the back end, we created this amazing product for these great customers, but we actually don't have the right channel to reach them or the right way to tell the message that they understand it. So there's coordination between strategy and go-to-market motions that need to happen on the front end and the back end to make all of this even work, even if I do create the perfect product to serve underserved needs for this target customer.
We should just give up, man. It's too complicated. Hard enough to create a good product with sales breathing down our neck. Now we got to have a good distribution strategy and go to market as well. Yeah, it's challenging. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, for me, so the way I like to summarize it, and I talk about this in my book, is when you're building a new product, there's various categories of risk, right? There's true technical risk. I'm sorry to say, if you have like a web server and a database, that is not true technical risk. True technical risk is like, can we send someone to Mars? Can we invent this gene, whatever. So, I'm not trying to minimize, there's obviously complexity and scalability, but most software does not have true technical risk in like, can we even do it kind of a thing, as opposed to these other things, right? So that's one category. And if that's the main category, the point is there's different categories. Let me go through them. Technical risk, product market fit risk, like, are we creating enough customer value that anyone even cares about this? And that's frankly what all my stuff is all about, is mitigating that. You could have some kind of business model risk or distribution risk where, we, even though we can solve a problem, it just costs too much to sell it or distribute it, or it's just not a big enough market, things like that. Like the example I give there is like, there's this horrible disease. We're the only people in the world that'll kill you. We're the only people in the world with a vaccine. We have perfect product market fit. The problem is only one person in the world is ever going to get this. So we have a market size issue, or it's going to be really costly to reach them, right? So there's different kinds of, and so if technical risk is, you need to look across these categories and say, what's our biggest risk? If technical risk is the biggest risk, then go do true R&D to mitigate the technical risk. If it's like market size distribution, then go work on that, right? Usually, like if it's, usually you just do a simple back of the envelope kind of business model to kind of look at the projections to see if they add up. Sometimes they don't add up. And then to your point, distribution channel risk. For me, the biggest reason most products fail is not those things. It's product market fit. Did you create value? And so, I'm not trying to minimize the point about distribution channel or go to market, but it all starts here. That's the thing. If you start here and you talk to people, it'll come up. It's funny. I've had people that they have trouble recruiting people to do research. I'm like, okay, well, maybe your market's not that big. If you're having trouble finding these people, that's maybe an indicator, right? So I think it's important to just analyze the risk and think what's going on. I think the reality is it's too hard to line up all the dots in advance and be realistically think you're going to have it all figured out in the beginning. You don't know what you're doing. It's not spaghetti against the wall, but you have uncertain theories and hypotheses. You just got to do your customer discovery research, then get your prototype in front of people, and that is where you're going to get a lot of feedback. And then you launch your product, and now it's like out there in the wild, people using it. And then could we get burned that we didn't think about some distribution thing? Sure, but it's hard, and there's definitely some complex ecosystems. If you've got like a distribution system or reseller network, that could be really critical. So you might want to, back to the pyramids, that's what I would say to answer that question is, if you've got some major and this gets into kind of Porter's 5 forces, like channel power. Someone that's got a lot of channel power and is a reseller, that kind of thing, they're a whole new pyramid. That's basically how I would treat it. Like that distribution channel or that distributor network, you need to make sure you understand their needs. You see what I mean? That's what I would say, basically. Yeah. All right, great question. Good questions?
So one of the departments that I work with is a research and development department, and I would love to use their insight to develop prototypes, but they are largely self-led and they develop their own prototypes, and then we have to kind of reverse engineer how to sell those. I guess, do you have any advice on getting out of that pattern and how to influence their prototype?
Yeah. Well, so if and this may not be an exact fit, and I'll ask you more questions in a sec, but basically this happens is a lot of big companies go, you know what? We try to do these major projects and major things, and they're just not working out. We can't innovate anymore. Let's create an innovation lab. And that's where we'll go. And they'll germinate the ideas and they'll prototype. Maybe they prototype, maybe they don't. In your case, they do. And then they'll vet them. And then once the vetted ideas, then we'll bring those back to the mothership, and the mothership will build it and take advantage of our distribution channels. And sounds great on paper, right? The problem is, if they get a prototype and vet it, and then they come to the mothership and go, hey, business unit A, we have an idea for you. And everyone in business unit A is like, I don't even know what you're talking about. What is that thing? I sell this thing. I built this thing. The sales team's like, I sell this thing. So it's like the organism rejects it's like antibodies. Like, no, I don't know what this thing is, right? And especially if you're a big mature company, all the DNA and culture and processes in the company support the main business line business unit. And anything that tries to incubate can just kind of be crushed and get lost in that. So, but back to your specific thing, is this software? Is it hardware? What is it?
We're a data company, so it's figuring out interesting ways to deliver the data.
Okay. Is it one of these bring it back to the mothership model, like delivery? Yeah, right. So that's what happens with those. So hopefully you can just be like, hey y'all, the last 3 or 4 things you brought to us, like a cat bringing a dead bird to the floor mat, we did not take it. We didn't like it, right? We didn't accept it. It didn't go anywhere. So all your hard work didn't pay off. Do you want to keep doing that? Like, do you want to keep wasting your time? And maybe they do because they're a think tank and they don't care. Maybe they don't care, right? Somebody probably cares, right? So I don't know. And that really kind of also gets into org design. Like, how far up the org do you have to go before, there's a common leader? If they're on Pluto and you're on Earth, and it's like there's no, then it's like, okay. So I don't know. I would just try to talk with the management chain and be like, gosh, it would be great if we could get involved earlier, so we could kind of be bought in and make sure the prototype's realistic and it makes sense. I don't know, So, but usually failure is a big motivator. I mean, somebody's funding that incubator or innovation lab, and if not a single commercially viable idea has come out of there, at some point they got to be like, hey, what are we doing here? I don't know. So, yeah.
Just follow up.
Yeah.
Is there a way to?
Yeah.
Okay. Is following on that, that question? Is there a way to maybe teach them the problem space and get them sort of plugged into that?
Well, the problem is when you start out with the word R&D, they're usually way in the solution space. They're all excited about the technology. They're just geeking out on, hey, look at this, right? That they're geeking out. And it's interesting because I don't want to minimize that, right? That it is important to know about customer problems. Have the Steve's job code up there. What's great about Apple is they have deep customer insight and they're on the forefront of cutting edge technology, and they figure out how to bring those together. Most R&D labs, they're just on the cutting edge of technology, and they're just like excited about playing with that, and they don't usually have PMs or just researchers, user researchers. They could, but it's just more like hey, it's to your point, it's solution first thinking. I think it's culturally they probably have a bias for solution first thinking. Could you try to train on problem based thinking? Definitely. I think there could be ways to partner. I don't know if there's some way to partner. Basically, it's at the outset is when you want to partner, so that we're clear on what's the market opportunity here, and then they're like a cannon and say, okay, well, we're going to point you at this market problem. Go crazy now and try to figure out how to do technology on it. But they're starting with the solution. I think so. Yeah.
But a lot of times if you're using the same tools, like Figma, you get a lot of that design and you don't have to reverse engineer it. So if you're working with the same tool.
Yeah, I think it's more complicated than that because the data product, they're in like data products like R and SAS and all that. You probably yeah, sure. Is it off the shelf software? No, we have our own custom stuff that we do in software. All right, cool. Yeah.
Sorry, that was a question on Zoom.
All right.
The question is, what are the biggest mistakes you see companies make when prioritizing features or initiatives? And how do you advise teams to avoid them?
Okay. I see. I just gotta give a shout out to McKinsey. I use that same, so they put the Princess Bride thing up there. You keep using the word MVP. I do not think it means what you think it means. I do that for Agile, and I'm going to Agile, same thing. Biggest mistake. So the biggest mistake of all is they don't really prioritize. It's like the loudest mouth, the squeakiest wheel gets the head of sales bangs on the table, or your CEO, like you said, right? It's like it's really just stakeholder power determines prioritization. That's like level one problem. The other way you can do it is, okay, we divided it up, the pie, into 5 slices, so each person gets their own slice, and you get to do, it's just like this egalitarian thing of like, okay, each team gets their own pie of resources, and then the problem then is, well, how do you know that the next thing on team one's roadmap isn't more valuable than what team two is doing right now, right? So that's another thing. The other thing is, is being realistic about the ROI. Like I can lie and say the return's $1 bazillion, and then it'll get prioritized high. So it's like, how do you really do apples to apples on the value, right? So if you do ROIs, my favorite way of doing it, the dev effort, there's uncertainty there, but it's usually people can get their head around it more. The return is where you get wild swings. You got someone saying, this is a 50 million ARR opportunity, we got to do it right. So, and then the other thing that happens is typically the things that create more value, have a higher return, have a larger scope, right? That's how it works. And so sometimes you end up with your roadmap is like, we have a bunch of big rock, this whole big rock, pebble, sand analogy. We have a bunch of big, big aggressive projects that we're doing. We have 6 of those that are happening concurrently. What could go wrong, right? It's like, so there's a bit of portfolio approach of like, hey, let's definitely have 2 or 3 big bets for the year or the quarter, but then let's have some medium-sized bets and let's have some small ball improvements, right? So there's a portfolio approach. So not failing to take a portfolio approach. So those are some prioritizations. Okay.
Let's take one more.
Yeah, let's do one more. Is there for any more from Zoom or not? Let's see. Okay, that was it. Okay, cool. That was it. Will the recording be available? I think so. Okay. Got it? Okay, last question.
So going back to the kind of crappy horse head
Yes.
thing there, where it seemed like you were
Isn't that awesome? Yeah.
advocating against this idea of like fixed time variable scope because it compromises on quality here. If you think about the alternative where you fix the scope but let the time just drag on as long as possible, is that really a better alternative? In a lot of startups, it seems like time is the more valuable.
Yeah, let's ship crappy stuff quick. That sounds like a good strategy, man. It's not black or white. It's a trade. The whole point is there's a trade-off. The whole point is the triangle. There's trade-offs, right? We can do whatever combination of scope and time we want, but there are trade-offs. That's the point. what I was trying to say is, and usually most of the people, they are not telling you, yeah, you still need to launch on June 1st, but it's okay if you cut those 3 features. Do those senior stakeholders tell you it's okay to cut dumb features? No. They want this. And why do you live in an or world? Let's live in an and world. I want this and that. That's usually what they say. They want it all. So what I'm trying to say, what this is trying to say is this is not done deliberately. Nobody said, yeah, we'll cut some features so it looks like this. This is just what happens when you insist on the scope, the original scope and the original dates. That's what I'm saying, what happened. To your point, could there be some corner case where you just let things go forever? Yeah, there could be a corner case like that. But all I'm saying is be smart about the trade-off and acknowledge that there's intrinsic uncertainty. So when you say we're going to launch these 6 features by June 30th, there's a decent chance you won't. So one, have them rank ordered so you know if you need to cut something, which one's going to go. And then, that's another thing what I was trying to get at with usually the high ROI, high value ideas have the highest scope, right? There's no kind of shortcuts. And I'm like, hey, every once in a while you get a magic bullet, silver bullet feature that doesn't take a lot. So that's why it's important to break things down into smaller chunks too. That's another way to avoid this is just, okay, we can break it down and then we're able to do a better job prioritizing things, right? The main point of this is if you look at companies, are they more likely to stick the date and have this happen, or are they more likely to let the date flex out? It's way more the former. Most companies, it's the former. We talked about those magical dates in B2B, right? And everybody laughed because they know exactly what we're talking about, right? This is the dates, right? There's nothing magical about these dates except sales. They signed up for some sales numbers for these dates, and the product leaders signed up for some roadmaps for these dates, right? So it reminds me, I think Douglas Adams said, I love deadlines. I love the whooshing sound they make as they go by, right? Now, I'm not saying deadlines are important, they're good, right? But the point is people get fixated, and it's really a baloney deadline, right? So that's all. Could you theoretically, just let things slip forever? Sure. But you need to be rigorous and disciplined about the scope you bite off as well as the time, both of those, right? So. All right, cool. Great questions. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to stick around. Happy to chat with you all. Thanks for coming out in person. And for those of you on Zoom, thanks for coming in. Thanks, Nick and Weave, for hosting. I appreciate it.
All right. Quick survey for all of you, and I probably should have done this before you start speaking. How many of you came from the Provo area? Handful. How about Salt Lake area? All right. How about Draper area? South Jordan. How about any other areas?
American Fork.
Oh, wow. All right. So we're all across the board. That's interesting. Just a few things. If one, feel free to take any pizza home. We ordered way too much Papa John's, or Papa Jonathan's, as I like to call it. Another thing is, if you guys have recommendations for any speakers that you think would be really great, please reach out to me. I'm on Slack, LinkedIn. Name is Nick Boulanger. And, it doesn't just have to be a software product. It could be a physical product. I actually think that'd be really neat. So if any of you guys have any ideas of someone, or if you think yourself would be a great speaker, please reach out. Anyway, Ivers, thanks for coming. You guys are great. I'll see you next event. Thank you.